Hello everyone, and I want to take this time to welcome you back to the Wicked Orchard Presents Reality and Fiction. I am your host, Sidra Owens, and I am so glad to have you back with me today. We're going to avoid an introduction since you all should know why we're here and what we're talking about. And I am going to talk about vaccinations. That's the topic that's been burning on my mind for a while. And I'm going to start off much like I did last week. I am going to start off with a little history lesson. So it can be argued, and I would say argued positively, that vaccinations have greatly extended the human lifespan. We're living well into our 70s and 80s. And that's a good thing, especially if we can take care of ourselves. But right now, we are all still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of us are facing the reality that a large percentage of the U.S. population doesn't want to get vaccinated. So before we get into the reality of those who don't want to get vaccinated, let's go back into the past and talk about vaccinations a little bit. So, inoculations against diseases, namely smallpox, has been documented to go back into the 1500s and practices in China and India. What they would do to try and combat smallpox back then, they had two methods. The first method was they would take scabs from the lesions of smallpox patients and grind them up into a powder and blow them into the nostrils of a healthy person, theoretically causing that person to be infected with smallpox, but it's not a direct and extremely virulent infection. So, if they experience symptoms and then they get over those symptoms, if they are ever faced with or presented with or exposed to, that's the proper word, exposed to smallpox, then theoretically they would be protected. The second way that they inoculated against smallpox back then was through a process called variolation. I just discovered this word in my research. And variolation is when they take the fluid from the smallpox pustules and scratch it into the arm of a healthy person, thereby causing the same results I just described with the ground up lesions being blown up the nose. So by our standards, this sounds perfectly awful, but if you're trying to keep from dying by smallpox in the 1500s, all of this is on the table. This technique spread to parts of Africa, to Turkey, and even to 16th century Europe. The number of people who died from smallpox reduced because of these types of inoculations, but it wasn't an exact science. So oftentimes, even if you were inoculated through the variolation, you were still contagious, so you're still spreading smallpox to other healthy individuals. And then sometimes those who were inoculated ended up dying from the disease. So as I just said, it wasn't an exact science. It was the best they had at the time. So let's fast forward to 18th century Europe. 18th century Europe was being ravaged by smallpox, with children being hit in particular. So a scientist by the name of Edward Jenner, back in 1796, he had heard tales that milkmaids, women who milk cows, were naturally protected against smallpox. And he also took further notice that although most women who were affected by smallpox were horribly disfigured by the scarring left by the lesions, once they did recover, milkmaids had beautiful skin. And those same milkmaids who had the beautiful skin were working with cows whose udders were riddled with pockmarks that they had suffered when they were contracted cowpox. So he deduced that somehow the milkmaids being exposed to cowpox helped them repel the cause of smallpox. So in his most scientific way possible, he found a milkmaid that had fresh cowpox lesions on her arms and hands, and he used the fluid of those lesions to inoculate an 8-year-old boy. So the 8-year-old boy did develop some symptoms. He developed fever, cold, loss of appetite, but after about 9 days, he was fine. So once he recovered, he then took the fluid from the pustules of a person with fresh smallpox lesions and inoculated the 8-year-old boy, and he did not develop any symptoms whatsoever. So this was the birth of vaccines in the Western Hemisphere. There have been countless diseases that have been eradicated because of vaccines. U.S. citizens don't have to deal with smallpox. They don't have to deal with polio, tetanus, measles, mumps, rubella, whooping cough. There are vaccines for all of these. We all know there are. We've all been vaccinated with MMR, tetanus in our early childhood. Most of us had our children vaccinated. And then, things would go along fine. I would imagine that the number of people who were against vaccinations up until the early 90s was kind of small because these diseases were being eradicated in this country. Children were healthy. Things were great. But in 1997, a British surgeon named Andrew Wakefield published an article in The Lancet, a medical journal, suggesting that MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, was increasing the rates of autism in British children. It wasn't until 2005, 8 years later, that an investigative reporter notified The Lancet that Wakefield's studies had been riddled with research misconduct, conflicts of interest, and general falsehoods. If you've done any kind of research whatsoever, and I've only done a little bit, when you're trained in how to properly conduct research, they make it extraordinarily clear that there can't be any conflicts of interest, no payments. You can't just falsify information. You can't falsify your findings. There can be no misconduct, because then your research is just trash and you're not proving anything. So upon finding this out, The Lancet, they retracted the article that Wakefield published, and he lost his license. But that by then the cat was out of the bag. This has spread through the UK, it spread through the US. All kinds of news outlets had gotten a hold of it, and so many people claiming that their child was fine until they received the vaccine, and then they started showing signs of autism. When the newspaper would print something that was erroneous, they would later print a retraction, but that retraction was always small and several pages in to the newspaper, never right on the front like the original story was. So Pandora's box was open, and even though there have been many who have conducted studies to prove and debunk that there isn't any kind of link between MMR, the mumps virus, and the epidemiology of autism, it doesn't matter. That article, it being released into the world, created a generation of anti-vaxxers. People who had been vaccinated and had lived their lives fine, not autistic, deciding no, the risk was too high, they were not going to vaccinate their children. So them not vaccinating their children puts other children at risk. And this has been an issue since 2005. All of that really sets the stage for COVID-19. So prior to the vaccine for COVID-19 coming out at the beginning of 2021, the virus took well over 600,000 people in the U.S., affecting countless lives, countless families. If you have not been touched by COVID-19 as of now, you probably will be. You're going to lose people for various reasons, because our country was not equipped to deal with the pandemic. From a government standpoint, from a medical standpoint, it was not equipped to deal with a pandemic. Literally, they did not have the equipment to deal with a pandemic. And now we understand that the people, a large percentage of the people in this country, are not equipped to deal with a pandemic. So the first so-called cure that came out or was revealed or suggested for COVID-19 back in 2020 was chloroquine. Chloroquine is used to treat malaria, lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis. Now, malaria is caused by a parasite, and no one in the U.S. has to deal with malaria. Lupus and rheumatoid arthritis are autoimmune diseases. When it was suggested that chloroquine could be used to potentially fight and cure people of COVID-19, people who actually needed chloroquine, those who suffer from lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, were having difficulty getting it because these other people were getting it. Because their president said, hey, take this, it'll work. He owned stock in the company that made it, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. And a lot of people did take it. An elderly couple took it. Not any they got from a pharmacy or a physician, but they had some tank cleaner that had it as an additive, and they decided, fish tank cleaner that had chloroquine as an additive, and they thought that it would be a good idea to take it. And the husband died, and his wife suffered critically in the hospital. Eventually, it was determined by the medical field that chloroquine was not an effective treatment for COVID-19. And eventually, that kind of faded into the periphery. And so then we fast forward to the beginning of 2021. Pfizer, Moderna start rolling out their vaccines. Eventually, Johnson & Johnson rolls out their vaccine. And people are beginning to get vaccinated. Many were clamoring to get vaccinated. But then you started to find those who, nope, I'm not going to get vaccinated. Why not? We're in the midst of a pandemic. People are dying. It would be prudent to protect yourself the best that you can. But many people said no. They weren't going to get it. Even after their former president said, get the vaccine. No, they thought he was wrong because I guess he was so against it before. I didn't keep up with his leanings at the time. So a lot of people have refused to get vaccinated. Now, when the chloroquine came out, they were chomping at the bit to get a hold of that. But they don't want to get vaccinated because it came out too fast. It was created too quickly. The government is trying to control you, inject you with nanites or some other conspiracy theory in order to control you. So they're not going to take the vaccine. Okay, they're always screaming about their rights. They have a right to not take it. The new one I like is their bodies, their choice, but whether or not they take the vaccine. Okay, but recently, for some reason, a new medication, word went out that a new medication, ivermectin is going to treat and protect you better from COVID-19. Ivermectin is used to treat worms and livestock. Ivermectin is given to cows and horses. They keep it at feed stores. But these same people who did not want to go to their sterile and secure medical facilities to receive a vaccine that takes mere seconds to get would rather go to the local feed store and get what they give to cows and horses to treat them for worms. That was a better idea. That made more sense to them to take medicine made for livestock as opposed to medicine made for humans. Now, not only is there COVID-19, there have been several variants, but the most contagious and virulent and deadly right now is the Delta variant. The Delta variant is the most abundant virus in the country right now, and it is killing people. And hospitals are full to the max with people who were not vaccinated and contracted the Delta variant. Now, prior to the vaccine coming out, there was something called monoclonal antibodies that were released as a treatment for people who have contracted COVID. But you had to be in a certain criteria. If you were elderly, if you were immunocompromised. You were taking medicine for an autoimmune disease like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. If you're a cancer patient and you're under chemotherapy. If you're pregnant. These are the criteria that you had to fit under to receive the monoclonal antibodies. But I do not think that treatment was well known to the public. Bring it back to now it is well known to the public. Not only are those who are elderly or immunosuppressed, immunocompromised, or pregnant should be getting those monoclonal antibodies in response to a COVID infection, but those who have become infected with COVID and have not been vaccinated are wanting to get the monoclonal antibody infusion. So these same people said no to the vaccine because it was developed too quickly and the government might be trying to control you, but they'll say yes to the monoclonal antibodies. So essentially, no, I have no personal responsibility to take care of myself, but once I get sick, I need you to take care of me. That's what that says to me. And it makes no sense. It just comes down to it. It does not make any logical sense. We all know that common sense isn't common, unfortunately, and that's been proving right over and over again. I do not understand how you cannot take the personal responsibility to at least take care of yourself. If you don't have it in you to try and look out for others, even your loved ones by being vaccinated, at least be selfish and express a little bit of narcissism and want to take care of yourself and get vaccinated. No, they don't want to do that. But they'll get the monoclonal antibodies. They keep saying, oh, the vaccine was developed too quickly. I don't trust the pharmaceutical companies. Now, granted, pharmaceutical companies, they haven't really earned our trust, especially with the price gouging and them creating medicines that lead to death and severe side effects later on. I understand that. But as soon as you get sick, you run to the doctor and you'll take every pill they prescribe for you. When you were a child, you were vaccinated and you had nothing to say about it. You come down in a cold, you will go to any drugstore and gather up every medicine, pill, and lodge it on the aisle trying to make yourself feel better. But you won't take a vaccine to protect yourself against something that has the potential to kill you or someone you love. It makes no sense. Let's take one step further. You say no to the vaccine, but you'll say yes to drugs. Now, I'm not here trying to down anyone who partakes in drugs. That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that you won't go to your secure and sterile medical facility, your primary care physician, your emergency room, to get a vaccine that you can get for free, but you will pay money for someone who have made drugs, whether it was cocaine cut with baby formula or crystal meth made in someone's garage, kept in their pocket, waiting for you to come and purchase it. You will pay money for pocket drugs and ingest them into your body orally, nasally, or intravenously, but you won't take a vaccine provided to you for free from your sterile and secure medical facility. And let's take it one step further. You say no to your vaccines, but you say yes to any number of illicit and irresponsible sexual behaviors. You will put your mouth on every orifice a man or woman has, not knowing what they have, if they're clean, if they've been tested, no safety, but you won't go to your sterile and secure medical facility to receive your free vaccine. It does not make sense to me. And I cannot find very much goodwill for this lack of responsibility, accountability, personal advocacy, or just kindness towards your fellow humans. It's stupid, ladies and gentlemen listening. It's absolutely, positively stupid. When I was younger, I wouldn't have believed this. But being older now, and with many of the things that I've seen, especially in the past 10 years, it disappoints me profoundly But I'm not surprised. It makes no sense. When I first heard the story about the ivermectin used to treat worms and livestock, purchased at your local feed store, that people were going to get this, but they would not get a vaccine, I had to laugh. It's ludicrous. But that is the kind of reasoning, the kind of logic that a third of this country is displaying. But those same people are now clamoring for aid, wanting assistance, wanting their lives saved, when they couldn't take the simple step, the simple measures to get a simple vaccine when they had the opportunity. When I think of these things, or when I write my blogs, or now that I'm doing the podcast, I often think, okay, we have to do more than lay out the problem and lay out the stupidity of it. What's a solution? What is a solution to this? The only thing that I can think of is educating these people who don't know, but a lot of these people are happy in their blissful ignorance. They don't want to know the truth, so telling them is just shouting into the wind. The only solution to problems like this is actually when you play the long game. And I'm going to explain the long game. When I was in high school, I was interested in science and medicine with dreams of becoming a physician. But with that goal in mind, I learned a lot of things about medicine. I knew what immunocompromise was. I knew the story about Edward Jenner and how he developed the vaccination for smallpox. I learned that in school. And it took me a while to realize, I had to step outside of my bubble to realize that kind of education is not the norm. That there are millions of people that have no idea what these terms are. So when they go to their physicians, they just have to take what they say at face value. They are not properly equipped with the information or the education to be their own advocate. The only way to deal with the ignorance that has led to the anti-vaccine problem that we're suffering right now is to educate as early as possible. Teaching basic health information should be mandatory. It should be something that you learn late elementary, middle school, high school. You should know that there's a difference between a bacteria and a parasite and a virus. You should know that you can't take an antibiotic for the flu because the flu is caused by a virus, and antibiotics are not going to help you. There's a lot of antibiotic resistance because as soon as someone sees some green snot, they say, oh, I've got an infection, give me an antibiotic, when they may not need it. And a lot of doctors, do not have their patient's best interest in mind. They'll give them an antibiotic, let them shut up, and they'll collect their pay. No matter what the cause may be in the future, that antibiotic resistance, that is a simmering problem, not just in this country, but around the world. People have to be educated early, and this stuff isn't complex. Knowing the difference between a virus, a bacteria, and a parasite is basic. It's basic biology. And then you have to go that one step further to teach them, what is done to treat a bacterial infection, which is antibiotics. What is done to treat a virus. Viruses you really can't treat. You just kind of have to ride it out. But you can prepare for a viral infection with a vaccine, like the flu vaccine or the COVID vaccine. You need to learn what an autoimmune disease it is, what immunocompromise is. These are just basic medical terminology. And I think that there should be a push so that when children get older, they are capable of being their own advocate. This stuff should be taught in tandem with sex education so that when children get older, they can make positive and well-informed decisions about their sexual health and practices. I think that many of the talks that I give in these podcasts are going to end up falling back into the necessity for people to be educated early during those formative years. Because as they get older, as we get older, we get crotchety, we get stubborn and stuck of our ways, and we think we know everything and no one is going to tell us different, and we will hold on to that stubbornness to our own detriment. So we have to catch people early when their minds are sponges and they can soak these things up and use them for their future betterment, for their future survival. Because if it goes on this way, we're going to have generations of people who can't survive. They can't ask basic questions, make basic decisions about their own health, and yet they're driving out here with us and reproducing as well. That, my dear listeners, is the scary part. That is what should frighten you. Yeah, this isn't my most uplifting, and they're not always going to be uplifting. The last one wasn't uplifting either, but it's something that I needed to discuss and needed to get off my chest. It's stupid, and we need to do better. So, right now, what I'm going to do is I am going to slide us into a little bit of escapism. We can put the anti-vaxxers and COVID-19 on the back burner for a few minutes, and we are going to get into chapter 2 of A Haven Amidst Perdition. If you are interested in checking out the chapter 2 of A Haven Amidst Perdition, you can always check out the complete podcast on Spreaker and click on the link below to get access to that. You all take it easy.